Hello friends, if you want to watch super hit movie Scream in English, then you must like this video. If you are visiting our channel for the first time, don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Friends, in today's video, the movie we're going to talk about is called Scream. We will talk about what this movie is and where you can watch it, all the interesting facts about this movie in today's video. I'm going to tell you, I'm also going to give you all the information on which a platform or on which satellite channel you will get to watch this movie. Also, we will talk in detail about the technical department, music department, pre-production, filming, post-production, budget, box office collection of this film. We will also talk about the story of this film, and I will also give you a small review of the story of this film. Apart from this, we will discuss about the facts of this film, storyline, star cast, actors' performance in the film, and which character has played which role. That's why I request you friends to watch this video till the end, and so let's start the video. Scream is a 1996 American slasher film directed by Wes Craven and written by Kevin Williamson. It stars David Arquette, Neve Campbell, Courteney Cox, Matthew Lillard, Rose McGowan, Skeet Ulrich, and Drew Barrymore. Set in the fictional town of Woodsboro, California, Scream's plot follows high school student Sidney Prescott Campbell and her friends, who, on the anniversary of her mother's murder, become the targets of a costumed serial killer known as Ghostface. Williamson, who was struggling to get his projects off the ground, was inspired by reports of a series of murders by the Gainesville Ripper as he wrote a screenplay that satirized the cliches of the slasher genre, popularized in films such as Halloween, 1978, Friday the 13th, 1980, and A Nightmare on Elm Street, 1984. Developed under the title Scary Movie, Williamson's script became the subject of an intense bidding war from multiple studios before Miramax Films purchased the rights. Craven, despite turning down the opportunity multiple times, agreed to direct the film after he had read the script, as he was determined to reestablish himself after several career setbacks. The involvement of Barrymore and Cox helped secure more support from the studio. Principal photography took place from April to June 1996 in California on a budget of $15 million. Craven trimmed down the violence in the film after being involved in a tense conflict with the Motion Picture Association of America, MPAA, over the desired R rating. Released on December 20th, Scream was not expected to perform well due to concerns over releasing a slasher film in a time normally reserved for holiday entertainment. However, it went on to gross approximately $173 million worldwide through the strength of word of mouth, becoming a surprise success and one of the highest-grossing films of the year. Contemporary reviews were positive, with praise going to the performances of its cast and its unique meta-humor, but criticism was directed at its excessive violence and lack of suspense in favor of that humor. Scream revitalized both Craven's and Barrymore's careers and helped bolster the careers of its young cast. In the years since its release, Scream's reception has been positive. It has been credited with rekindling interest in the horror genre during the 1990s, following a decline in the genre's popularity, and has been credited for shifting the genre towards younger audiences and casting established actors. The film's opening sequence, in which Barrymore's character is killed by Ghostface, is considered one of the most shocking and subversive in cinematic history. The success of the film launched a multimedia franchise which comprises the sequels Scream 2, 1997, Scream 3, 2000, Scream 4, 2011, Scream 2022, Scream 6, 2023, and Scream 7, 2026, as well as an anthology television series. Plot: in the small town of Woodsboro, California, high school student Casey Becker is home alone when she receives a phone call from an unknown person. They discuss horror films until the caller turns sadistic, threatening her life and revealing that her boyfriend Steve is tied up on her patio. The caller demands she answer questions about horror films to save his life, but Casey gives an incorrect answer about Friday the 13th. Resulting in Steve's death. Casey attempts to escape, but is stabbed to death by someone wearing a Ghostface costume, and her disemboweled corpse is found hanging from a tree by her parents. The next morning, the news media descend on the town as a police investigation ensues. Casey's classmate, Sidney Prescott, struggles with the impending first anniversary of the rape and murder of her mother, Maureen, by Cotton Weary. The trauma has made her unable to consummate her relationship with her boyfriend, Billy Loomis. As her father, Neil, is traveling for work, Sydney waits at home alone for her best friend, Tatum Riley. She receives a call taunting her about Maureen's death and is attacked by Ghostface, who disappears just before Billy climbs through her window. Sydney immediately grows suspicious when he drops a cell phone, and Billy is arrested by Deputy Sheriff Dewey Riley, Tatum's brother. Outside the police station, Sydney gets into a physical altercation with investigative journalist Gail Weathers. Gail had written a book claiming that Maureen had multiple extramarital affairs, including one with Cotton, whom Gail believes was falsely accused of Maureen's homicide. Sydney stays at Tatum's home, but receives another taunting call from the killer. The calls are traced to Neil's phone, but the police are unable to locate him. Following his release, Billy encounters Sydney at school and further upsets her by comparing his absent mother to Maureen's death. After suspending classes in the wake of the murders, Principal Himbry is killed in his office. To celebrate the school's closure, Stu Macher, Tatum's boyfriend, hosts a party at his secluded home. Dewey and Gail keep watch on the party in case the killer strikes again. Tatum is isolated in the garage by Ghostface, who crushes her neck in the garage door. As fellow high schooler Randy Meeks details the rules of surviving a horror film, news arrives of Himbry's murder. Most partygoers leave to see his body, nearly running over Dewey and Gail while inadvertently leading them to Neil's hidden car. Billy arrives at the house to reconcile with Sydney, and they finally have sex. Afterward, they are attacked by Ghostface, and Billy is stabbed. Sydney evades Ghostface, who kills Gail's cameraman Kenny and stabs Dewey when he returns. Gail, attempting to flee in her van, crashes and is knocked unconscious. Sydney seeks refuge inside the house, locking Stu and Randy outside as they accuse each other of being the killer. A seemingly wounded Billy emerges and allows Randy inside before shooting him in the shoulder, revealing himself as the killer and Stu as his accomplice. Billy confesses they killed Maureen because the discovery of her affair with his father led to his mother's abandonment. The pair abducted Neil to frame him for their crimes and proceed to stab each other to depict themselves as the last survivors. However, they are distracted by Gail's return, allowing Sydney to incapacitate Billy and kill Stu by dropping a television set on his head. Billy nearly stabs Sydney but is shot by Gail. After Randy remarks that horror film killers revive for a final scare, Billy lunges for them, but Sydney shoots him in the head, killing him. As dawn breaks, Neil is rescued, Dewey is taken away by ambulance, and Gail provides an impromptu news report about the night's events. Cast? Further information on individual characters, list of Scream 1996 characters. David Arquette as Dewey Riley, the goofy and hapless deputy sheriff. Neve Campbell as Sydney Prescott, a strong and resilient high schooler traumatized by the murder of her mother. Courteney Cox as Gail Weathers, a snarky and ruthless investigative journalist, 6'3". Matthew Lillard as Stu Macher, the eccentric and clumsy boyfriend of Tatum and Billy's best friend. Rose McGowan as Tatum Riley, Sydney's spunky best friend and Dewey's sister. Skeet Ulrich as Billy Loomis, Sydney's boyfriend, who possesses a passion for horror films. Jamie Kennedy as Randy Meeks, a horror film fanatic. W. Earl Brown as Kenny, Gail's cameraman. Joseph Whipp as Burke, the town sheriff. Liev Schreiber as Cotton Weary, the man convicted of killing Sydney's mother, 15. Drew Barrymore as Casey Becker, a high schooler, 16. Scream also features Roger L. Jackson as the voice of Ghostface and Kevin Patrick Walls as Steve Orth, Casey's boyfriend. Lawrence Hecht and Lynn McCree portray Sydney's parents, Neil and Maureen. C.W. Morgan appears as Hank Loomis, Frances Lee McCain portrays Mrs. Riley, and David Booth and Carla Hatley appear as Casey's father and mother. Eonora Selfo portrays a bitchy cheerleader in the school bathroom. Scream features several cameo appearances, including Henry Winkler as Principal Arthur Himbry, Linda Blair as obnoxious reporter, casting director Lisa Beach as a reporter, and director Wes Craven appears as Fred the janitor, an homage to iconic horror character Freddy Krueger. In 1994, Kevin Williamson was a novice and financially struggling screenwriter, having recently sold his first script Killing Mrs. Tingle, 1999. While house-sitting, Williamson watched a Turning Point documentary about serial killer Danny Rolling, which he said left him unsettled. Williamson later noticed an open window, armed himself with a knife, and called his friend for support. The pair began discussing horror characters that had resonated with them, such as Freddy Krueger and Jason Voorhees. The following morning, Williamson was woken by a nightmare and used the experience as inspiration for the opening home invasion of Scream. He was also influenced by a one-act play he wrote in college about an unknown caller taunting a young girl. Williamson spent the next 3 days writing a script for a slasher film he called Scary Movie while listening to the score to Halloween, 1978, for further inspiration. B. He also drafted 2 5-page outlines for possible sequels. He developed much of the script around a single line of dialogue: "Movies don't create psychos, movies make psychos more creative." This was his response to contemporary concerns about the influence of cinematic violence on audience, and he thought it was a great line. Williamson's script drew upon many of his favorite horror films, such as Halloween, Friday the 13th, Prom Night, both 1980, and A Nightmare on Elm Street, 1984. At the time, the successful slasher films of the 1970s and 1980s had fallen out of favor, in part because of increasingly poorly received sequels to long-running horror franchises. His characters were intentionally designed to be knowledgeable about these horror films and their typical elements, with the intention of creating a unique killer who was not only aware of horror film cliches, but also exploited them for his own advantage. Williamson expressed his approach: "I thought if you could expose the rules and play with them, then the audience doesn't know what they're going to get. Suddenly they're on edge. I started playing with the tropes, and the rules were part of that." The opening scene depicting Casey Becker's death emulates that of Janet Leigh's character in Psycho, 1960, by killing off a possible main character early on. Williamson believed it would hook studio executives and leave audiences unsure how the plot would progress. Williamson set the script in his hometown of Bayboro, North Carolina, believing its quiet atmosphere would provide a strong contrast with a serial killer's actions. Williamson pursued Scary Movie because it was the type of horror film he enjoyed as a child, but believed were no longer being made. Even so, he did not believe studios would develop and intended to use it to garner attention and secure other work. Williamson's agent had him scale back the gore, removing descriptions such as, "The insides are slowly rolling down her leg," because it would make it difficult to sell the script. Williamson refused to cut any dialogue, however, believing it set it apart from similar films. Development. By 1995, there was competition to secure the rights to Scary Movie, with early interest expressed by Morgan Creek Entertainment, Paramount Pictures, Universal Pictures, and filmmaker Oliver Stone. The script came to the attention of producer Kathy Conrad of Woods Entertainment, which had a development deal with production studio Miramax Films. She brought it to Richard Potter, the director of development for Miramax Films, genre film-focused subsidiary Dimension Films. Potter expected a stupid spoof, but was drawn in by the opening scene and recommended Miramax Films chairman Bob Weinstein pursue the rights. He agreed, considering it an opportunity to produce films instead of distributing those of others. Although others offered larger figures, Williamson's lawyer advised him take Weinstein's offer, $400,000 to $500,000, because Dimension Films was willing to make the film immediately. Williamson revised the script based on studio input, removing some gorier content, such as exposed internal organs and severed limbs, and adding the murder of Principal Himbry, because Weinstein said there was too long a period following the opening without any deaths. This solved a separate difficulty Williamson was having explaining why all but the core group of characters leave Stu's party in the finale as they go to see Himbry's corpse, 39. The Scary Movie title was also changed to Scream late in production because Weinstein was concerned Scary Movie would lead audiences to believe it was a comedy instead of a horror. The search for a director was protracted, with Danny Boyle, Tom McLaughlin, Sam Raimi, George A. Romero, Bryan Singer, Quentin Tarantino, Robert Rodriguez and Anthony Waller being considered. No agreements were secured because those approached for the role interpreted the script as a comedy instead of a horror satire. Wes Craven was discounted by the studio due to his lack of experience directing satires. Craven liked the script, but he wanted to work on less gory and more mainstream content, including a film adaptation of the 1959 horror novel The Haunting of Hill House, because of the negative public perception of him based on his previous films. Craven's assistant Julie Plec and producer Marianne Maddalena continued to push Scream to Craven. His interest was renewed after the Haunting of Hill House adaptation was canceled, and he experienced the personal disappointment of his failed horror comedy, Vampire in Brooklyn, 1995. After reading the script, Plec said Craven suggested the studio make him an offer he can't refuse. And so Dimension did, and he took it. The deal also offered Craven his choice of other projects to direct after Scream. Williamson met Craven to discuss the script, believing he would request substantial rewrites, but Craven's notes related mainly to typos and some minor additions, including restoring some of the gorier content and refining the ending, which was not yet fully realized. Williamson said, "The story stayed pretty much intact, but we added some scares and shortened it. Wes reworked some of the action sequences, and we would argue and go back and forth, but there's a point where I had to realize that Wes is more experienced than I am." Describing the script, Craven said, "What it forces you to do is sort of look at the reality of things we typically look at as amusing, like the Friday the 13th type of deaths where people have arrows through their heads and kids scream and laugh. But that suddenly starts happening in their actual lives." Atypical for the genre at the time, Scream featured a cast of established stars, such as Drew Barrymore and Courteney Cox, as well as relatively unknown actors. Executive producer Kerry Woods used his friendship with Barrymore's agent to cast her in the lead role of Sidney Prescott, but she later requested the smaller role of Casey Becker. Maddalena suggested that Barrymore had wanted to leave the project entirely, but took the smaller role to avoid disappointing Bob Weinstein and his brother Harvey Tay. The filmmakers agreed to the change, believing it would be impactful to kill off their most well-known actor during Scream's opening and convince audiences that no character was safe. Vanessa Shaw and Reese Witherspoon were also considered for Sidney Prescott. Witherspoon was discounted because she looked too young compared to the other cast, and Williamson's choice, Molly Ringwald, believed she was too old for the part. The final choices came down to Alicia Witt, Brittany Murphy, and Neve Campbell. According to Williamson, Campbell swiftly emerged as the favored choice among the principal crew, and to improve her chances, they filmed her screen test first, forcing the other contenders to try and surpass her performance. Beach and Maddalena said Campbell brought athleticism from her dancing background with a combination of strength and vulnerability. Describing what attracted her to the role, Campbell said Sidney was a fantastic character for any kind of movie, who transitions from tormented, traumatized, insecure young woman to overwhelmingly empowered and strong. Woods suggested Courteney Cox for the cold and calculating Gale Weathers, believing it would be interesting to play against her typical personable characters in series such as Family Ties, 1982 to 1989, and Friends, 1994 to 2004. Craven did not believe Cox could play the part, and so she wrote a letter assuring him that being a bitch wouldn't be a stretch at all. Brooke Shields and Janine Garofalo were considered, but a more established actress was preferred. David Arquette auditioned for unspecified younger characters, but he was attracted to the role of Dewey and acting against Cox. The character was written as a dumb jock, but Arquette interpreted it as a position of authority getting no respect. He wants to be John Wayne. He wants to be this tough guy, but he's just got a heart of gold. Rose McGowan's agent jeopardized her chance to play Tatum by insisting on a payment of $250,000 instead of the offered $50,000, which was lower than the $100,000 received by some other principal actors. As a result, McGowan had to re-audition for the role twice. McGowan influenced Tatum's design, dyeing her hair blonde to avoid having two dark-haired main female characters, removing an Indigo Girls poster from Tatum's bedroom, because she would not listen to the relatively older band and rejecting costuming suggestions in favor of her self-bought outfits. Thora Birch and Natasha Lyonne also auditioned for the role. Lyonne was the preferred choice, but, as she was under 18, could not consent to joining without parental permission. Believing he was rising in popularity, Vince Vaughn was the studio's preferred choice for Billy Loomis, but he was too ill to audition. Skeet Ulrich did not attend auditions because of scheduling conflicts, but his girlfriend did and mentioned Ulrich brought her. Beach went out to meet him personally. Ulrich liked playing a serial killer after more innocent and naive previous roles. To develop his character, Ulrich researched serial murders, psychological profiles, and outfitted one of his hotel rooms to the Billy persona to help him get into character, outfitting it with punk rock posters and black lights. He said, "I was into punk music in my teens and really just trying to recapture that angst. I would sit in there and read about serial killers and watch Faces of Death 1978, anything to get into that gory mindset." Ulrich and Campbell starred together in The Craft 1996, which they believed fostered a natural relationship between their characters. Matthew Lillard auditioned for Billy, but the casting directors did not consider him the right actor to make out with Campbell, and had him audition as Stu for Craven, who immediately offered him the part. Seth Green, Jason Lee, and Breckin Meyer were all preferred for Randy, the lanky, gangly, opinionated fifth wheel who really has a love and passion for movies. But Craven and Williamson appreciated the innocence and comedy that Jamie Kennedy brought to his portrayal. Kennedy credited Craven for supporting his casting barber. W. Earl Brown and Craven were friends, and he was not required to audition, but did have to gain about 20 pounds, 9.1 kilograms. He originally wanted to portray Dewey. Roger L. Jackson was hired based on his voice work for Mars Attacks, 1996. He recounted overhearing his competitors discussing the Ghostface as the new Freddy Krueger, but Jackson interpreted it as a more subtle role which required charisma and sexiness to keep his target on the phone even though they want to hang up. Barrymore wanted someone to act against in her scene instead of the character's lines being read to her, and while the filmmakers intended to dub over Jackson's voice with Tom Kane, Craven liked his performance. Henry Winkler shared an agent with Craven and made his cameo appearance as a favor. Lynn McCree, Sidney's mother, was a Sonoma local. She spent 2 hours taking pictures with Campbell for the role, but had no knowledge of the character's backstory. Liev Schreiber took the part of Cotton Weary for $20,000 during an unrelated meeting with Bob Weinstein. Extras were drawn from locals, including the owners of a restaurant frequented by the cast and crew. It was determined early on that Scream required too many different interior and exterior locations to be filmed on sets. Production designer Bruce Miller explained that it was important to portray the characters as vulnerable in their homes, which made it essential that they could film inside and outside the properties. Scouts researched locations in the United States and Canada, but struggled to locate a house for the opening scene, which featured plentiful windows and visibility. Craven initially researched Wilmington, North Carolina, but it failed to meet his expectations. "I wanted to have very American-looking houses, and a lot of the houses there were very dark brown or brick, and that didn't look attractive to me." Locations near Vancouver were discounted for similar reasons, as was Napa County, California. Santa Rosa in Sonoma County, California, offered most features the filmmakers required, but the Weinsteins rejected the additional $1 to $2 million required to film there until the filmmakers convinced them that Craven's name would attract enough audiences to compensate for the added cost. The opening scene used a house in Glen Ellen. Miller said, "We didn't want homes that looked like castles or that you could really protect yourself in, so if somebody was going to be stalking them, they could get to them very quickly." Other Santa Rosa locations used in Scream include Sidney's house at 1820 Calistoga Road, interiors of Tatum's house at 824 McDonald Avenue, and the Bradley Video Store, where Randy works. The Healdsburg, California Town Square appears as the location of the Woodsboro Town Square, the fountain, and the exterior of the town police station. Stu's home was an unoccupied property in Tomales which offered a dark and isolated atmosphere for the finale. Cinematographer Mark Irwin unsuccessfully argued against using the property because it was on top of a hill, introducing logistical challenges for accessing trailers and equipment. Miller built a facade of barns in front of the house so trailers could be sighted closer while remaining concealed. The art department extensively modified the house, adding Gothic elements such as beams and stained glass windows to give it a haunted feel, painting the walls red, although they realized later this made the blood stand out less, and adding a white picket fence. The farmhouse-style home offered a convoluted layout for a convincing setting where the murders could occur without the other characters realizing. The production crew also added a volleyball net to make it appear as if a teenager lived there. Santa Rosa High School was selected to portray Woodsboro High School due to its Gothic and castle-like imposing visuals. 10 days of filming were to take place there in early June at a cost of $30,000 to $50,000, but permission was revoked in March 1996 by the Santa Rosa School District. The change was ostensibly because of the disruption filming would cause during school hours and scheduled exams, but several school board members objected to the violent content in the script, and hundreds of locals attended a council meeting to debate against and for the production. The board ultimately voted against allowing filming. The Sonoma Community Center served as a replacement filming location, but scenes had to be rewritten to accommodate the new location and additional cost to transform the former elementary school into one appropriate for young adults, including larger desks and installing lockers. Craven estimated the disruption and location changes caused by the Santa Rosa District's decision cost the production $350,000, including the $27,000 the center was paid for 3 days of filming. The disruption to filming by the school was not forgotten, with the film's credits stating no thanks whatsoever to the Santa Rosa City School District Governing Board. Williamson's script had not described the killer's appearance beyond wearing a ghostly white mask. Special effects company K&B EFX Group was commissioned to design a mask, but the filmmakers disliked their gargoyle-ish, witch, and goblin-like masks designs. While location scouting a house, Madalena came across what would become the Ghostface mask. This mask, featuring a white shroud, was designed by Bridget Slyerton as the peanut-eyed ghost for the novelty company Fun World in 1991, based on a design by makeup artist Lauren Githens. However, Craven and the studio wanted to own the design used in the film and tasked K&B EFX with creating a similar but legally distinct design. Stretching the nose and chin unhappy with the results, Craven eventually decided to pursue the original Fun World design. The killer's outfit was completed with a black shroud to avoid their clothing or movements hinting at their identity. Filming. Principal photography began on April 15, 1996, on a $14 million budget. The first week was spent filming the Casey Becker scenes. To elicit the necessary emotions, Barrymore recalled a sad story developed with Craven and made herself hyperventilate Tar. To enhance her performance, Jackson was situated outside the house so that he could see Barrymore while making the calls, but she could not see him. Jackson was used similarly for other Ghostface call scenes and never met the cast in person. He said, "The scariest monsters are the monsters you don't see, but the monsters you make in your mind." So just having the voice to react to made it larger in their minds. For safety, stunt performers portrayed the killer in costume, although Craven portrays the killer in parts of the opening days. The first few days of filming used a custom mask designed for Scream, but Craven did not like it and reshot various scenes with the Fun World design before it was licensed. Because the hung Casey was to appear gutted from chest to waist, effects artist Howard Berger decided against applying prosthetics to Barrymore in favor of a mannequin that could be hollowed out, showing her spine holding her upper and lower parts together. The effect was enhanced with various rubber and vinyl guts. For Steve Orth's death, K&B created an open-back chair, allowing the actor to kneel behind a hollowed-out anatomical mannequin torso open at the abdomen and filled with latex, rubber, and gelatin intestines. After viewing the Daily's raw footage, Bob criticized the quality of Craven's work as workmanlike at best. believing it lacked tension and had an inconsistent tone. He was critical of the Fun World mask, believing it was flat and not scary, and ordered that the opening scene be refilmed with alternative masks to see which worked best. 95-96. Barrymore was also criticized for lacking sex appeal because of the page boy hairstyle she had chosen. Williamson recounted Craven receiving a call from the brothers and seeing his back slump. He just started sliding down the chair. The studio considered firing Craven and sent him dailies from other films, such as Night Watch 1997, to demonstrate what they wanted for Scream. Conrad defended Craven to the brothers, and in response, Bob Weinstein sent Dimension executives Cary Grunat and Andrew Rona to the set to directly intervene. Craven, Conrad, Madalena, and line producer Stuart M. Besser met with Grunat, who wanted the opening reshot with each of the Weinstein's alternative mask suggestions. Instead, they offered to edit together the existing footage to prove the scene and mask worked, and if it did not, then the project would be canceled. Editor Patrick Lussier worked with Craven to piece together most of the opening, adding temporary music and sound effects. The Weinsteins barred Craven and the producers from attending screening of the footage. Afterward, Bob Weinstein told the filmmakers, "What do I know about dailies? Keep going," and provided additional financing. The producers suggested Weinstein had an ulterior motive to force the filmmakers to complete the footage. The upcoming Milan Film Festival, as edited footage, was not typically allowed to be screened until 8 weeks after filming concluded. The next main scene filmed was of the central cast sitting around a fountain. Ulrich admitted he did not realize Scream was intended to be a horror with comedic elements and was confused by Lillard's and Kennedy's humorous moments, believing they were ruining the movie. Like, this isn't funny. This isn't supposed to be funny. And man, was I wrong. Craven encouraged improvisation throughout filming, much of it coming from Arquette and Lillard, with Williamson acknowledging that Lillard's ad-libs improved the script. The film's 42-minute end sequence, set at Stu's party, was filmed at night over 3 weeks. Issues filming at the location, including difficulties with providing proper lighting because of the uneven landscape, exacerbated tensions between Craven and Irwin regarding the quality of Irwin's footage. Scream was filmed with an anamorphic lens, which distorts and stretches the image to achieve a specific aspect ratio. However, neither Craven nor Irwin had much experience with this type of lens. The crew, including Lussier, had raised concerns about lens flares and out-of-focus images, partially blaming the focus puller hired by Irwin. Lussier explained, "You can often tell your focus is supposed to be on somebody's eye usually, and the focus puller just hasn't moved with the actor. As a result, there were limited options during the editing process due to the inconsistent focus." Irwin said he was informed that all filmed footage was unusable and that 35 days of scenes needed to be reshot. After an argument with Madalena, Irwin was immediately fired and replaced by Peter Deming for the final 3 weeks of filming. Irwin believed he was made a scapegoat for the film's behind-schedule status, risking Craven forfeiting his salary, but Conrad denied this. Kennedy's Horror Rules scene was initially performed in a single take, but he requested additional takes, feeling he could enhance the performance. Craven ultimately chose the third take. During Tatum's death scene, McGowan had trouble staying in the pet door as the garage door rose. To address this, the crew nailed her shirt to the frame to hold her in place. Craven found it challenging managing the scene's tone, aiming to avoid trivializing Tatum's death while paying homage to other horror films. McGowan improvised the screams for her mother to give the character more humanity. When Gale drives a van with Kenny's corpse on top, Brown was on top of the van, but the unprepared stunt driver accelerated at full speed. When he hit the brakes, Brown fell off the side of the van, and the stunt coordinator grabbed Brown's pants and ankle, saving him from harm. 5 nights were spent on the kitchen confrontation between Billy, Stu, and Sidney. By the time they had filmed Gale returning with a gun, Ulrich said he and Lillard were roaming around like caged animals to keep the intensity of their performances high, to the point Craven asked them to relax because they were scaring Cox. Lillard described maintaining that level of adrenaline as exhausting. Campbell, Kennedy, Lillard, and Ulrich endured multiple nights covered in fake blood, and the costumes could not be washed to maintain continuity. They were dampened each night to make the blood appear fresh. When Ulrich stabs a sofa, the filmmakers were unaware it was stuffed with feathers which stuck to the fake blood. Madalena considered Craven nuts for keeping the feathers in the scene. Lillard improvised lines such as, "My mom's gonna be so mad at me," and "You fucking hit me with the phone, you dick," the latter taking place when Ulrich threw a phone near him as intended, but the sticky blood caused it to veer off and inadvertently hit Lillard. Ulrich suggested Billy cracking his neck before shooting Gale, and the sound was added in post-production. Campbell's stunt woman accidentally stabbed Ulrich with an umbrella tip, missing the protective vest he was wearing and hitting the site of an open heart surgery Ulrich had as a child. Filming concluded on June 14, 1996. The cast spoke fondly of the summer camp atmosphere during filming and the camaraderie they formed. The main cast and select crew members, including Craven, often gathered together in the early mornings after filming for meals, activities, and socializing. Arquette's hotel room was transformed into a makeshift club where they would congregate. However, due to complaints from other residents, they eventually relocated their early morning gatherings to a nearby barn. Post-production. The Scary Movie title remained late into production, appearing on the cast and crew gifts for completing filming. Harvey Weinstein suggested Scream based on the Michael and Janet Jackson song, Scream. Many of the cast and crew were initially unhappy with the change. Sony Pictures filed a lawsuit against Dimension and Miramax, claiming Scream infringed on their copyright of Screamers 1995. The case was settled out of court, with Dimension being able to use Scream going forward. Although Arquette's and Kennedy's characters were killed in the script, alternate scenes were filmed showing them survive in case they proved popular with test screening audiences. The successful screenings also resulted in Miramax asking Craven to direct 2 Scream sequels. Scream was rated NC-17 by the Motion Picture Association of America, MPAA, restricting its audience to those over 17 years of age, which was considered box office suicide by industry experts. The MPAA told Craven that Scream would never receive a more commercial R rating, allowing younger people to see the film when accompanied by an adult. Craven said, "I'm a director who can do something very well, but am not allowed to put it on screen, and they ultimately get you, as they did on this one, on intensity. They say it's not a specific shot, it's not blood, it's just too intense." The filmmakers eventually convinced the MPAA that Scream was a spoof, believing they were too focused on the horror aspects. It took up to 9 cuts to address the MPAA's complaints, including removing any movement of Steve Orth's internal organs, trimming Kenny's throat being slit because the actor's pained expression was too disturbing, moving Billy and Stu stabbing each other off screen, and reducing scenes of Casey's hanging body and Tatum's crushed head. Few frames removed because there was no alternate footage to use. The final cut runs for 111 minutes. Music, main articles, Scream, 1996 soundtrack, and music of the Scream franchise. Despite having no background in film scoring or an interest in the horror genre, Marco Beltrami was recommended to Pleck and Craven, who found his music samples original compared with Beltrami's contemporaries. Craven gave Beltrami a weekend to compose The Cue from Hell, the score for the film's opening sequence, which secured his hiring. Beltrami wrote the piece from Casey's perspective and used an operatic style, employing a range of instruments, including piano and brass. Beltrami described himself as bumbling through the scoring process, acknowledging his limited knowledge of horror music styles. He incorporated elements of the Western genre, particularly for Dewey's theme, and took cues from composers including Elliot Goldenthal, Ennio Morricone, Eric Serra, Christopher Young, and Hans Zimmer. Due to budget constraints, Beltrami had to work with a small orchestra of fewer than 50 performers. To compensate for the lack of string harmonics, he instructed the string players to whistle and asked Craven, Lucier, Madalena, and Woods to join and boost their numbers. Beltrami identified most with Sidney's character and considered her theme, Sidney's Lament, to be one of the score's crucial pieces. He chose not to assign a distinctive motif to Ghostface to avoid hinting at the killer's identity. Licensed music for Scream was provided by TVT Records and includes covers of Don't Fear the Reaper by Gus Black and Birds Fly, Whisper to a Scream by Soho, School's Out by Alice Cooper, First Cool Hive by Moby, and Drop Dead Gorgeous by Republica and 130. Excepts from the Halloween score are also present. Release. Context. See also 1996 in film. Over 40 films were scheduled for release in late 1996, including Beavis and Butt-Head Do America, Jerry Maguire, Mars Attacks, Ransom, Space Jam, and Star Trek First Contact. Bob Weinstein opted to release Scream in December as counter-programming, offering teenagers an alternative to more traditional holiday fare. The decision was unpopular with the cast and crew, with Williamson expecting the film to fail. Weinstein explained, "People said we were crazy to put out Scream over Christmas. It was a thriller. It didn't have big stars. It couldn't compete." Well, after Beavis and Butt-Head, where is that audience going to go? The marketing for Scream positioned Barrymore as the lead character to intentionally shock the audience with her death, 55. During a promotional interview, Ulrich inadvertently revealed he portrayed one of the killers and called his agent to get the story blocked. Box office. The premiere of Scream took place on December 18, 1996, at the Avico Theater in Westwood, Los Angeles. It was released in the United States and Canada on December 20th. During its opening weekend, the film grossed $6.4 million across 1,413 theaters, an average of $4,497 per theater, making it the fourth highest grossing film of the weekend, behind 101 Dalmatians, $7 million, Jerry Maguire, $13.1 million, and the debut of Beavis and Butt-Head Do America, $20.1 million. The performance was considered a failure by industry professionals, resulting in Variety labeling Scream dead on arrival. Verification needed. Madalena recounted herself and Craven observing a raucous audience for Beavis and Butt-Head Do America, while Scream had maybe 7 people in there. No one was laughing or screaming. We went away so dejected. However, Scream received positive audience word-of-mouth and exit polling responses, leading the studio to increase the marketing and distribution budget. This contributed to Scream's performance improving in the following weeks. Although it fell to 5th place in its second weekend, it increased its weekend gross to $9.1 million, and again in its third weekend, rising to 3rd place with $10 million. Scream remained in the top 10 highest-grossing films for 9 weeks in total, becoming a surprise success and grossing a total of $103 million. This figure made it the number 13 highest-grossing film of 1996 and highest-grossing slasher film of its time until Halloween 2018. It was Miramax's second film to gross $100 million in the United States and Canada after Pulp Fiction 1994. The film was most successful with teenagers and young people in their 20s. Outside of the U.S. and Canada, Scream is estimated to have grossed a further $70 million, including $14 million in the United Kingdom, making it the number 21 highest-grossing film. This gives Scream a cumulative worldwide total of $173 million, making it the number 14 highest-grossing film of the year. After 4 weeks of release, it became the highest-grossing horror film in France with a gross of $6.2 million, 37.9 million French francs. In Japan, the release date was postponed from May 1997 to August after the murder of a 14-year-old boy whose killer was apparently obsessed with horror movies. Industry analysis showed that most of the films released toward the end of the year were box office failures, including both big-budget fare and a surge of films targeted toward women. Only a few were seen as successes, including 101 Dalmatians, Beavis and Butt-Head Do America, Jerry Maguire, Ransom, Scream, and Star Trek First Contact. The success of Scream resulted in additional financial compensation for the principal crew and cast, triggered by the box office surpassing $40 million and subsequent increments of $10 million up to $100 million. Kennedy noted that his first residual check was double his salary. Scream received generally positive reviews. Critics such as Roger Ebert, James Berardinelli, and Owen Gleiberman praised Scream's meta-commentary about its horror predecessors and its self-referential humor, while also writing that the self-parody diluted any suspense and criticizing the excessive violence. Some critics said that the film's intelligence and wit beneath the gore would be appreciated by sophisticated viewers, but Ebert was unsure if the degree of violence was diffused by the ironic way the film uses it and comments on it. Janet Maslin wrote that while Scream offered original ideas for the genre, it quickly exhausted them. Hartle offered a similar sentiment, believing Scream was so focused on referencing other films that it did not know when to settle down to tell a coherent story. Bill Stamets considered these references insightful, particularly the killer's motives, saying, "Killers without motives are far more scary." Critics such as Berardinelli, Thomas, and Leonard Clatty wrote positively of the ensemble cast and their instrumentality in the film's success. Peter Stack and Dave Keir praised Campbell for her standout performance that successfully carried the central focus on her character, portraying a tough, capable heroine who avoids the damsel in distress archetype. While some reviewers appreciated Cox for delivering a strong performance in an against-type role, others criticized her for being unconvincing as a tough and career-obsessed reporter. Thomas and John Hartle wrote that Arquette delivered a goofily charming performance. Lisa Alspector described Ulrich as the only cast member capable of balancing genuine characterization with self-parody. The film's opening sequence received praise for building tension and suspense. Gleiberman and Richard Harrington appreciated the absence of gratuitous nudity in the scene, which was atypical for the genre. Kevin Thomas credited Irwin's resourcefulness and Lucier's razor-sharp editing as key to Scream's success. Accolade. At the 23rd Saturn Awards in 1997, Scream won awards for Best Actress Campbell, Best Writing Williamson, and Best Horror Film. The film was named Best Movie at the MTV Movie Awards, and Campbell was nominated for Best Female Performance. Scream was named Best Film by the International Horror Guild. Craven also received the grand prize at the Gerardmer Film Festival. Post-release. Home media. The soundtrack of Scream was released in December 1996 by TVT Records as Scream, Music from the Dimension Motion Picture. It sold poorly. Scream was released on VHS and Laserdisc in June 1997 and was especially successful in the video rental market, becoming the second most rented movie of 1997 in the United States. In 2000, Scream was released as part of the Ultimate Scream Collection, alongside its then two sequels, Scream 2, 1997, and Scream 3, 2000. The release introduced special features including cast screen tests, outtakes, and a documentary about the making of the three films featuring interviews with Craven, Williamson, Campbell, Cox, and Arquette. A director's cut release of Scream restored uncut sequences removed for the theatrical release on 79. The film was released on Blu-ray in 2011, including previously released special features. For the film's 25th anniversary in 2021, Scream was remastered and released on 4K Ultra HD Blu-ray in a steelbook case. Alongside the previously released special features, the remastered version included A Bloody Legacy, Scream 25 Years Later, a documentary featuring new interviews with the cast and crew. In 2022, Varese Sarabande released the score in a limited edition 6-disc box CD set and digitally, alongside Beltrami's work on other installments, as well as unreleased music, demos, and alternate versions. A 4-LP record set was released separately in a jacket that turns into a Ghostface mask. Other media. A 2011 documentary, Still Screaming, the Ultimate Scary Movie Retrospective, documents the production of the original trilogy of Scream films and includes interviews with cast and crew from throughout the series. A book, It All Began with a Scream by Padraig Maroney, was also released that year, offering a similar look at the production of Scream and its three immediate sequels. The popularity of the Ghostface character generated a variety of merchandise, and the killer's outfit remained a popular Halloween costume as of 2023. Thematic analysis. Themes. Scream is influenced by and pays many homages to the history of the horror genre, including a school janitor referencing Freddy Krueger, a cameo appearance by Linda Blair, famed for her appearance in The Exorcist, 1973, and the killers admonishing the police for not watching Prom Night for advice. In a meta-reference, Randy recounts the rules of the genre. To survive a horror film, characters cannot sin by drinking, taking drugs, or having sex, and they cannot say, "I'll be right back," because you won't be back. This self-reference is extended when Randy, Jamie Kennedy, watches Halloween and yells at the lead character Laurie, Jamie Lee Curtis, to look behind her, oblivious to the killer approaching himself from behind. Further, Kenny futilely yells at Randy to look behind him while observing via a remote camera. When Sidney confronts Billy and Stu, she says, "You've seen one too many movies," to which Billy replies, "Movies don't create psychos, movies make psychos more creative." Writer Kate Gardner believed this dialogue rejects the blame on horror films for inspiring real-world violence. Lucia said the MPA had objected to this dialogue because you can't speak that kind of truth. Writers Adam White and Michelle Delgado wrote that Scream is an exploration of the exploitative nature of the news media using traumatic events as entertainment. The debut of Scream coincided with growing discourse in the United States on the impact of on-screen violence and its potential consequences for society. During this time, the Clinton administration introduced the V-chip, a device designed to enable parents to block mature television content. However, news programs remained exempt from the rating system, which Delgado said continued to exploit violent incidents to captivate audiences. 194. Gail portrays a relentless television reporter who used Maureen's murder to further her own career and seeks to do the same with the Woodsboro murders. Although Gail advocates for the innocence of Cotton Weary in Maureen's death, she does so both because she believes he is innocent and to secure a lucrative book deal. While Gail's actions revolve around profiting from the suffering of others, she is depicted not as a villain but a careerist and an antagonist to Sidney, who evolves into a heroic figure, aiding in the deaths of Billy and Stu. Gardner wrote that making a living from murder is not morally equal to committing murder, but that it represents the commodification of crime and female trauma. Scream acknowledges the audience's voyeuristic interest in murder and horror, underscoring the monetary value placed on sensationalized crimes. White described Williamson's script as emblematic of its time, featuring a picture-perfect mother raped and murdered in American suburbia and the stalking of her daughter 1 year later. He compared it to contemporary sensationalized cases such as the murder trial of O.J. Simpson, Lorena Bobbitt's assault of her husband, the Long Island Lolita case, and the Gainesville Ripper. The Ripper's defense included his assertion of being influenced by films such as The Exorcist III, 1990. Despite public concerns about the influence of violent media, instances of violent crime were decreasing when Scream was released, and there remained no direct link between violent media content and real-life crimes. Even so, public fascination with these media portrayals created a form of celebrity for the victims or perpetrators, with dramatic events being turned into documentaries and films. In Scream, Sidney jokes that a film will be made about the traumatic events of her life, and in the sequels, the film within a film stab horror series is created based partly on the events of each preceding Scream entry. Analysis. Author Padraig Maroney wrote that Scream was pro-feminism, depicting several final girls who fight the killer instead of submitting. The success of Scream demonstrated to studios that, although typically seen as fare for young males, horror films had an untapped female market. 195. Writer Ames Simon said Sidney, like Craven's Nancy Thompson, is allowed to develop as a character by surviving successive films. The Scream films often explore female trauma through characters such as Sidney and Gail, including the dangers posed by angry males who feel rejected. Gardner said that although this may not have been Craven's intention, the film's narrative effectively conveys this theme. She continued that the male killers in Scream enact violence and intimidation primarily on women, including Casey, who romantically rejects Stu before the events of the film, and Sidney's mother Maureen, as Billy blames her for the end of his parents' marriage. Maureen is not responsible for his mother leaving, but Billy blames her, takes his anger out on her directly, and then abuses Sidney's emotional vulnerability caused by her death. In this way, the portrayal of Billy and Stu as angry, entitled men seeking revenge is more relatable and realistic than supernatural horror villains. Scream has been analyzed for homosexual or queer undertones, influenced by Williamson's own experiences as a gay man. He has expressed how his personal struggles informed Sydney's character because he identified parallels between her survival tactics and those of young gay individuals. In a 2021 interview, he said, "As a gay kid, I related to the final girl and to her struggle because it's what one has to do to survive as a young gay kid, too. Subconsciously, I think the Scream movies are coded in gay survival. Several publications have highlighted the positive response from gay fans of the franchise to these underlying themes. Some writers, such as Maroney, Brant Lewis, and Joe Lipsett, have discussed the theory that Billy and Stu are in a homosexual relationship or that Stu held unrequited feelings for Billy. Professor David Grieven wrote that Billy and Stu are representative of the changing notions of masculinity and the underlying currents of queer desire in 90s films. The interactions between them throughout the movie contain themes of homoeroticism, such as when Stu playfully touches Randy's earlobe or leans on Billy during the climax before they stab each other with phallic weapons. Grieven believed that although it is easy to assign homosexuality to Stu because of his lack of motive to kill and apparent willingness to please his friend, Billy also features homoerotic characteristics such as the gay trope of fixating on his maternal relationship, similar to Norman Bates in Psycho, and Billy's visual styling resembling actor James Dean, considered a queer icon, 7. Williamson loosely based the characters on Leopold and Loeb, queer individuals who committed murder to prove their intellectual superiority. In a 2022 interview, he said he was very hesitant to present the gay side of me in Scream, and that any queerness in Billy's and Stu's characters was a little coded and maybe accidental. Legacy. Cultural influence. In the decades following its release, Scream has remained an enduringly popular horror film and launched a successful film franchise. It is credited with revitalizing the horror genre, which had significantly declined in popularity by the early 1990s. Far Out and MTV described Scream as a groundbreaking slasher film that successfully crossed over into the mainstream because of its deft blend of traditional horror with self-aware commentary and satire. Vox wrote that Scream mainstreamed metatextual storytelling and made that analytical understanding of the genre mainstream in a lot of ways. 206. Studios rushed to capitalize on Scream's success with teen-centric horror films and television series leading into the 2000s, such as I Know What You Did Last Summer, 1997, Urban Legend, 1998, and Cherry Falls, 2000, as well as sequels to popular but diminished franchises such as Halloween H20, 20 Years Later, and Bride of Chucky, both 1998. Scream also serves as the subject of the parody film Scary Movie 2000, which in turn launched its own franchise of horror spoofs. Director Jordan Peele has credited Scream as a direct inspiration for his own influential horror film Get Out 2017 in manipulating the audience's expectations of the contemporary horror genre. 206. Scream helped launch or bolster the careers of its principal stars, including Campbell, Ulrich, Lillard, McGowan, Kennedy, and Arquette. Williamson became an in-demand screenwriter, contributing to horror films such as I Know What You Did Last Summer, 1997, and television series Dawson's Creek, 1998 to 2003. Scream helped revitalize Craven's career after several career setbacks and a string of poor performances. Lussier credited his work on Scream's opening with his transition to director, beginning with Dracula 2000, 90. Barrymore's involvement helped raise the profile of the horror genre, making it a more attractive prospect for prominent actors instead of relative unknowns. In a 2021 interview, Kennedy said he was still approached by fans about his Horror Rules monologue. Lillard described Scream as a seminal moment of his career. He and Campbell began a 2-year relationship during filming, while Cox and Arquette married and eventually divorced. Scream has often been referenced in popular culture in and outside the horror genre. The Ghostface Killer is considered to be among the most iconic cinematic horror villains. The Billy and Stu version of Ghostface, voiced by Jackson, appears as a playable character in the fighting game Mortal Kombat 1 2023. As of 2021, Lillard's improvised dialogue, "My mom and dad are going to be so mad at me," was still quoted to him by fans. In the years since its release, Scream was cited as an influence in several violent crimes and murders, with perpetrators sometimes dressing as Ghostface, as in the 2006 murder of Cassie Jo Stoddard. Following the Columbine High School massacre in 1999, and increasing media and public scrutiny on the influence of violent films, games, and other media on society. The United States Senate Commerce Committee reviewed the marketing of films to youths, specifically the horror genre. Scream's opening was shown as an example of negative media which may be viewed by children. The use of caller ID to identify incoming callers also increased by 300% following Scream's release. Retrospective assessments. Scream is regarded as a classic of the horror genre and among the greatest horror and slasher films ever made. A D. Several publications have also listed it among the best films of the 1990s. Williamson believed Scream's success was due, in part, to fitting the contemporary zeitgeist when everyone wanted to have scary and fun in their life. If the movie had been released at any other time, I'm not sure that would have been the case. Campbell believed it connected with audiences because of a deft combination of humor, horror, and intelligence. As of 2023, Scream remains the highest-grossing film in the Scream film series and is generally considered to be the best film in the series. The franchise is also among the highest-grossing horror franchises, alongside Halloween, Saw, and the Conjuring universe. In 2008, Empire ranked the film number 482 on its list of the 500 greatest movies of all time, and Entertainment Weekly listed Scream as one of the best high school movies and among the best films of the preceding 13 years. On Rotten Tomatoes, the film holds an approval rating of 77% from the aggregated reviews of 122 critics, with an average score of 7.1/10. The consensus reads, horror icon Wes Craven's subversive deconstruction of the genre is sly, witty, and surprisingly effective as a slasher film itself, even if it's a little too cheeky for some. The film has a score of 66 out of 100 on Metacritic based on 25 critics, indicating generally favorable reviews. The British Film Institute BFI called the opening scene one of the all-time great pre-credit scenes, an unforgettable masterclass of building tension, heart-stopping terror, and shocking images. The scene appeared at number 13 on Bravo's 2004 list of the 100 scariest movie moments. Sequels. Further information, Scream franchise. Due to the success of Scream, development of a sequel began while the original was still in theaters. Scream 2, 1997, achieved similar financial and critical success as Scream. Williamson was unavailable to write Scream 3, 2000, the trilogy's concluding chapter, and was replaced with Aaron Kruger. The film fared less well than its predecessors, commercially and critically, and is regarded as the franchise's most divisive entry. Williamson returned to the series with the reboot film Scream 4, 2011. While Scream 4 has been positively reassessed since its release, its modest box office and critical reception on its release, as well as Craven's death, placed the franchise on hold. A television adaptation, Scream, 2015 to 2019, ran for 3 seasons. The Weinsteins refused to license the Fun World costume for the show or allow references to the films, which was controversial with fans and contributed to the series' low ratings, poor reception, and eventual cancellation. The film series was relaunched with Scream, 2022, and its success led to immediate development of a 6th installment, Scream 6, 2023. Both films are directed by Matt Bettinelli-Olpin and Tyler Gillett and written by James Vanderbilt and Guy Busick. These films focus on a younger cast, including Melissa Barrera and Jenna Ortega, with Campbell, Cox, and Arquette appearing in supporting legacy roles. Scream VI was the first film in the series not to feature Campbell, who declined to return following a dispute over pay, or Arquette. Scream 7 began filming in January 2025, with Campbell reprising her role and Kevin Williamson directing. Scream has become one of the most influential horror franchises of all time. despite the fact that it has existed for a much shorter period of time compared to other iconic sagas such as Halloween, A Nightmare on Elm Street, Friday the 13th, and the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. While Wes Craven's first attempt to make a self-aware horror film, New Nightmare, didn't become a cultural sensation, he found his calling with the script for Kevin Williamson's teen horror film Scream, which incorporated elements of noir mysteries and teen comedies. Scream was an interesting series because of its meta qualities, as the characters all had a knowledge of horror movie cliches that they had gathered from watching the same movies that the audience may have grown up loving. Despite the fact that the films are highly satirical, Scream was certainly not lacking in scares and created one of the all-time greatest final girls in horror film history with Neve Campbell's amazing performance as Sidney Prescott. Although Craven's work on Scream 2, an excellent sequel that was released in 1997, showed that the series had potential to keep moving forward, Scream reached a whole new level of popular culture dominance within the 21st century. Although Craven was able to helm 2 additional sequels that included the original case, the directing duo Radio Silence has been able to take over the 2 most recent sequels, which served as a soft reboot, including a group of younger stars. The next installment in the Scream saga has withered a continuous set of controversies, but is still set for release next year, and will presumably feature many of the original cast members from the first 4 films. Whether it can live up to expectations will be an entirely different question, but to the Scream franchise's credit, it's not a franchise that has ever had a significant dip in quality. While no film had been as impactful as the original from 1996, the Scream franchise does not have a sequel that is as disastrous as Halloween Resurrection, Freddy's Dead, The Final Nightmare, Jason X, or Texas Chainsaw 3D. Here is every Scream movie of the 21st century, ranked. Scream 3 is still a fun, engaging horror film with a number of great kills, but it lacks the focus of the first 2 installments. Scream had specifically attacked the cliches within horror films, and Scream 2 had analyzed how many sequels end up becoming exact recreations of their predecessors. Scream 3 tries to examine the impact that the real tragedies had on the Hollywood film industry by setting part of the adventure in Los Angeles, but the plot gets somewhat lost as Scream 3 takes on a tone that feels a bit too serious at times. Scream has always been an interesting take on the genre because of its self-aware humor, but Craven's film feels a bit stilted and serious as it tries to unpack the emotional trauma that Sidney has faced over the course of the trilogy. Scream 3 suffers from one of the most predictable plot twists in the franchise, which even inexperienced horror movie buffs would have been able to anticipate based on how obvious it is who the killer is. While Gale Weathers, Courteney Cox, and Dewey Weary, David Arquette, could generally be relied upon to give some comic relief, they have oddly muted roles and are mostly separated from Sidney. Additionally, the romance between Sidney and Kincaid, Patrick Dempsey, does not work at all, as the 2 stars have little chemistry. There's a pretty significant dip in quality between the first 2 Scream films and the 3rd installment, which may have explained why Craven wanted to make another legacy sequel over a decade later. Nonetheless, any film that includes a cameo by Kevin Smith and Jason Mewes as Jay and Silent Bob, respectively, can't be entirely bad. Scream was the first installment in the series not directed by Craven, and it also wasn't centered on the Big 3 from the original films. While Campbell, Cox, and Arquette were all in the film and gave entertaining cameos, the story is mostly focused on the sisters Sam, Melissa Barrera, and Tara Carpenter, Jenna Ortega, who discover that their town is once again being haunted by a killer in the Ghostface mask. Although the concept may have felt a bit antiquated when compared to other modern slasher films, Scream is surprisingly gruesome and contains some of the darkest kills in the entire franchise. It's also one of the rare installments in which the entire cast is filled with interesting actors, as it featured early performances by Jack Quaid and Mikey Madison before they began appearing in more critically acclaimed films. The best aspect of the 5th Scream film is also its biggest issue, as it often risks being too self-aware for its own good. While the popular culture references that were included within the first 4 films felt more groundbreaking, as they existed before geek culture had completely taken over the internet, Scream was left to reiterate many familiar talking points that film fans would know if they actively followed film reviews or had a Letterboxd account. While the motivation for the eventual killer ties into these themes in a smart way, it does feel a little overstated and lacks the emotional subtext that the tragedies of the first 4 films had. Nonetheless, managing to bring back legacy characters while adding younger co-stars was not an easy task, and Radio Silence deserves credit for blending 2 generations of heroes so seamlessly. Scream VI is easily the riskiest and most theoretically interesting installment in the franchise since the first film, as it dared to ask whether victims of trauma could become abusers under certain circumstances. Barrera may have felt secondary to Ortega in the previous film, but she is given the opportunity to give a far more interesting performance when Sam begins to grow concerned that she may be replicating the behavior of Billy Loomis, who Skeet Ulrich reappears as in one of the film's best cameos. Although it contains the same number of popular culture references as its predecessors, including some particularly cutting digs about film bro culture, Scream VI offers more psychological intrigue as it becomes the first Scream film to be set in New York City. Scream VI is one of the rare sequels to use nostalgia in a clever way, as it ties back the events of the previous films, including their killers, for a terrific reveal that leads to one of the franchise's best set pieces. Although Sidney's absence from the story does feel very distracting at points, Scream VI was able to embrace the totality of the franchise, particularly through the return of Kirby Reed, Hayden Panettiere, who became an FBI agent after barely surviving her first encounter with Ghostface. While some fans may have objected to the notion of Ghostface using a gun, Scream VI is able to adapt to modern anxieties that young people face, particularly when it comes to violence on campus. What's most frustrating is that Scream VI is the last film in the franchise that will feature Barrera, who was fired from her scheduled appearance in Scream VII. The interesting point in which Sam's story ends in Scream VI suggested that Barrera could have added even more depth to the character moving forward. Scream IV was a beautiful send-off to the first era of the Scream franchise, as it also served as Craven's final film before he passed away in 2015. In the decade since Scream III was released, the internet had changed in radical ways, leading to a new obsession with criminality that hadn't been seen since the days of Bonnie and Clyde. Craven created a multifaceted satire about how young people are drawn to exploitative violence when they don't respect the value of life, but also weaved in a clever message about how popular it has become to remake classic films. Making fun of Hollywood's greed and lack of new ideas isn't necessarily a new concept, but Craven's experience in the industry made him the perfect person to add these insights. Scream IV was able to have an interesting perspective on Sidney, as she is constantly pulled back into events from her past, despite the fact that she wants to move on. Although some of these decisions may have been divisive among Scream fans at the time, Scream IV served as a great way of previewing what the horror genre would transform into within the next decade, thanks to the rise of Blumhouse, Neon, and A24. While Scream is an inviting franchise that has a lot of room to grow within its next stage of iterations, there is something very special about the installments made by Craven that has been difficult to completely recapture. Scream is one of the most successful horror franchises, and while the creator of it has also brought other slashers, he also created a hit teen drama from the late 1990s that came out 2 years after Ghostface's debut. The slasher genre saw its peak in the late 1970s and the 1980s, with movies like Halloween and Friday the 13th, both spawning successful franchises that continue to be quite popular. The genre seemed to have died when the 1990s kicked in, until Scream arrived in 1996 to successfully revive the genre. Directed by Wes Craven and written by Kevin Williamson, Scream took the audience to Woodsboro, California, where Sidney Prescott, Neve Campbell, and her friends began to be stalked by a serial killer dressed as Ghostface. The success of Scream launched a franchise, with Williamson returning as writer in the second and fourth movies. In between horror projects, Williamson moved to TV, creating various TV shows, the first one being very different from what he created in Woodsboro, the now classic teen drama Dawson's Creek. Scream is one of the most successful horror franchises, and while the creator of it has also brought other slashers, he also created a hit teen drama from the late 1990s that came out 2 years after Ghostface's debut. The slasher genre saw its peak in the late 1970s and the 1980s, with movies like Halloween and Friday the 13th, both spawning successful franchises that continue to be quite popular. The genre seemed to have died when the 1990s kicked in, until Scream arrived in 1996 to successfully revive the genre. Directed by Wes Craven and written by Kevin Williamson, Scream took the audience to Woodsboro, California, where Sidney Prescott, Neve Campbell, and her friends began to be stalked by a serial killer dressed as Ghostface. The success of Scream launched a franchise, with Williamson returning as writer in the second and fourth movies. In between horror projects, Williamson moved to TV, creating various TV shows, the first one being very different from what he created in Woodsboro, the now classic teen drama Dawson's Creek. More real, moreover, while Freddy was busy coming for you in your dreams, Jason was relegated to Camp Crystal Lake, and then later a boat, and then Manhattan for like 10 minutes. Victims anywhere and everywhere, appearing in school, at home, and even lurking in the background of convenience stores. And then there's the character. Dynamics, our so-called final girls here, is Neve Campbell, Sidney Prescott, a character who has depth and backstory. She's mourning the loss of her mother and struggling with her boyfriend's sex-driven pressure, making her a different kind of character to the disposable. Teens we're so used to seeing in the slasher subgenre. Sidney isn't alone here either. There's Ski Ulrich Billy, Sidney's boyfriend who is angry at his parents' divorce, Courteney Cox's driven and arrogant reporter Gail Weathers, who seeks recognition and a story at all costs, David Arquette's deputy Dwight Dwayne Riley, who yearns to be seen as a serious officer of the law. These characters feel like people. They all have things going on for them beyond the murderous killing spree they find themselves caught up in, and Williamson's script is smart, using a H-done-it mystery angle to play up each character's individual stories, further separating it from those who came before. That we not only don't know who the killer is, but that it could be any one of the characters we've met, gives the movie license to explore them in more depth than your usual sastic piece of horror, and further emphasizes the realness of Scream as a whole. It goes without saying, I think that Scream is a classic, but not only is it a classic, it's also really, really good. It's brutal and frightening and tense as all hell, and features some great set pieces and genuinely upsetting moments. The cameraman is laying dead. On top of the new van is just well yet, and there's not much I can say that hasn't already been said. Of course, as we all know now, it reignited the subgenre and produced a slew of imitators, most of them nowhere near as good as this one, as well as spawning a franchise of its own. But the original remains an icon, near perfectly executed, and balancing the tone between its more comedic moments and its legitimately frightening ones with aplomb. Williamson and Craven are a match made in heaven. The writer witty and self-aware, script blending perfectly with the director's assured and confident direction, while the cast are all pitch perfect in their performances, with each character being as memorable as they are suspicious, ensuring that as they're slowly picked off one by one, we actually sort of care about what's happening. I also have a personal connection here, as Scream is the film that arguably defined my early teenage years, and I remember writing down the titles of all the movies referenced in the flick and excitedly hunting them down for myself. So thanks. Scream because of you, I've seen PR Night, and because of that, I've seen Hello Mary, Lou PR Night 2, and for that I'm eternally grateful. As the genre continues to evolve, one thing becomes ever more clear. Scream is a masterpiece and remains just as brilliant as ever. Wes Craven's Scream Vile. One of the oldest rules in movie history, it's about characters who go to the movies, They've even heard off movie stars they refer by name to Tom Cruise, Richard Gere, Lee Curtis. They analyze motivations. Did they went to the movies? In The Last Picture Shown, and the heroes of Clerks worked in a video store. Even Bonnie and Clyde went to the movies, but those movies were about the ACT off. Going to the movies. Scream is about knowledge of the movies. The characters in Scream are in a horror film, and because they've seen so many horror films, they know what to do and what not to do. Don't say, "I'll be right back." One kid advises a friend because whenever anybody says that he's never right back. In a way, this movie was inevitable. A lot of modern film criticism involves deconstruction of movie plots. Deconstruction is an academic work. It means saying what everybody knows about the movies in words nobody can understand. Scream is self-deconstructing. It's like one of those cans that heats its own soup instead of leaving it to the audience to anticipate the horror. Has the characters talk about them openly. Horror movies are always about some big-breasted blonde who runs upstairs so the slasher can corner her, says a character in Scream. I hate it when characters are that stupid. The movie begins, of course, with a young woman, Drew Barrymore, at home alone. She gets a threatening phone call from an evil Jack Nicholson sound achy. She is standing in front of patio doors with the dark night outside. She goes into a kitchen where there are lots of big knives around. You know, the drill. Later, we meet another young woman, Neve Campbell. Her father has left for the weekend. Her mother was murdered. Why? Exactly a year ago tomorrow. Her boyfriend climbs in through the window. At Thai school, rumors of cult killings circulate. The killer wears a spooky Halloween costume named Father Death. There are more phone calls, more attacks. The suspects include the boyfriend, the father, and a lot of other people. Annis touched the high school principus, the fonts. After that is the plot. Scream is not about the plot. It is about itself. In other words, it is about characters who know they. Arena plot. These characters are Fangoria magazine. They even use movie-style dialogue. I was attacked and nearly filleted last night. The heroine has been rejecting her boyfriend's advances. And just as well as another character points out, virgins are never victims in horror films. Only bad boys and girls get sleddo pieces, realizing they're in the midst of a slasher plot. The characters talk about who could play them. I see myself as sort of a young Meg Ryan, but with me luck, I'll get Tori Spelling. The movie itself, for all of its ironies and jokes, also functions as a horror film, a bloody and gruesome one that uses many cliches as it mocks one old standby. Is the scene where someone unexpectedly enters the frame, frightening the heroine, while a sinister musical chord pounds on the soundtrack. I love these scenes because E, the chord carries a message off danger, but B, of course, the unexpected new person is always a harmless friend. And C, although we can't see the newcomer because the framing is so tight in the real world, the frightened person would, of course, be able to see the newcomer all the time. The movie is also knowledgeable about the way TV reporters are portrayed in horror films. The reporter, this time played by Courteney Cox of Friends, asks wonderful questions, such as, how does it feel to almost be the victim of a slasher savvy as she is? She nevertheless suggests to a local deputy that they shouldn't drive to an isolated rural setting when it's a nice night, BR down a deserted country road in the dark while a slasher is loose. Other information about film confession time. I am not a fan of horror movies, as in, I have mostly avoided all horror movies with a 10-foot pole my entire life. I'm already quite high. So combine that with a jump scare and I'll hit the ceiling nearly every time over the past couple of years. However, I began an attempt to ease into the genre and push my limits. I recently watched Scream 1996 for the first time to test my horror film boundaries and get into the spooky season. I must say I loved it. I figured Scream was a gateway film into the genre since it's known for being more of a fun, scary movie than a covery or eye-terrifying horror flick. I watched this movie with a few friends, and as they said, it's great for those who appreciate the Halloween spirit, but don't actually want to be left scared out of their minds. Scream is a slasher film within the horror genre, directed by Wes Craven and written by Kevin Williams. The film features a roster of 1990 stars, including Neve Campbell, Courteney Cox, Matthew Lillard, and Drew Barrymore, sporting peak nines, fashion the plot. Follows a high school student, Sidney Prescott, played by Campbell as Ghostface. A killer dressed in a ghost Halloween costume targets Sidney and her friends. While it features a healthy dose of grisly murders, par for the course in any slasher Scream also satured is the cliches of the genre popularized by Halloween, 1978, Friday the 13th, 1980, and A Nightmare on Elm Street, 1984, among others. The characters often discuss the rules of horror movies and the predictability of the plots, like the long, outdated virgins survive trope. There are many times when the tension is broken by a gag or comical pratfall by Ghostface, allowing Scream to deliver. Horror movie thrills, while not taking itself too seriously, the film still follows through on those heart-arsing chase scenes you expect, and is certainly not all fun and games. We're dealing with a serial killer after all. You'll often yell at the character on screen to go the other way, and that just adds to the fun. Simply put, Scream achieves what it set out to do. Offer a scary movie spooky enough to fit the season, but lighthearted enough for the more timid fans to enjoy. As an added plus, the film is an excellent period piece of the late 90s, full of data references to cellulars, video stores, and VHS. Hello, horror fans and slasher stands. It's Slick Dungeon here. I'm gearing up to go see the 6th installment of the Scream franchise soon. But before I do that, I wanted to review all of the previous movies here. For these reviews, I plan on going in depth, so if you have not seen the movie, I advise you not to read this review yet. Scream is a great slasher franchise, but the best parts of it are surprising events and reveals. So, definitely have a watch first, because reviewing without spoilers is never easy with these movies. When I do review Scream 6, I will have a first reaction spoiler-free review, followed by a spoiler-heavy review for the rest of these. Watch first, or risk the fun of the movies being taken away by reading. I'm going to be talking about individual scenes, characters, and themes, so it's all fair game in these reviews. I will only spoil things from the first movie in this review, so you don't need to have seen all the Scream films to keep yourself spoiler-free. Just the first one in order to understand Scream. It's important to put it into historical film context. In the 1980s and 1990s, there had been a glut of horror films. Friday the 13th had already put 9 films in the can. A Nightmare on Elm Street was up to 7 films, and both franchises were waiting for the crossover of the two killers. Halloween was up to its 6th film, and the Texas Chainsaw Massacre had 3 films out as well. And these are just slasher films. Probably the most innovative horror film in the decade. Before Scream came out was Silence of the Lambs, and an argument can be made that film is more of a psychological thriller than out-and-out horror. And all this doesn't even take into account the huge number of other knockoff and imitation films, some with merit, but mostly derivative and boring. This is all to say the slasher film was about as dead as can be imagined in 1995. No one wanted to see one because no one thought they could be surprised by them anymore. But like a good slasher film, this type of horror had one last gasp before it was gone for good. Enter one of the masters of horror, Wes Craven, who was matched up with an aspiring screenwriter named Kevin Williamson. Scream came out on December 20th of 1996. It was the kind of film where there wasn't much buzz around it other than who directed it and was starring in it. While horror fans certainly knew Wes Craven and Drew Barrymore has enough star power to draw anyone to theaters, most of the rest of the cast were less well known. All of the main cast had been in other films, but they were not necessarily the icons of the nines. They would go on to be the film stars: David Arquette, Neve Campbell, Courteney Cox, Matthew Lillard, Rose McGaw, Skeerick, and of course Drew Barrymore. The film had enough going for it that there would be some fans in the seats no matter what. What it really had going for it was a smart story making a statement about horror and slasher films in specific, with completely unexpected twists. Guaranteed to get word of mouth going. More details, Scream is a slasher flick about a killer who taunts his victims over the phone, mostly about scary movies, before killing them. The final girl, Sydney, is still mourning the death of her mother. The prior year, her life was disrupted by accusations, rumors, and reporters months before more killings began to strike. It's a mix of genuine horror and intelligent satire of horror. I only recently began watching slashers since I have a friend who is a horror scholar and she loves slashers. I had to get this meta-framing on what slashers do in order to appreciate the movies. I've only ever been into supernatural. Horror, really the Shining 13 ghosts, the others. And I didn't understand the appeal in watching normal people try to kill each other. My impression was one of meaningless gore and screaming. I'd argue that slasher horror is an experiential genre. The gore/screaming isn't exactly meaningless, but most of what you get out of it is the excitement of a chase and the social experience of watching it with friends. The meaning is punching your bro in the arm, saying OMG, 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 because it's getting tense, throwing pillows at the screen, when the heroine is stupid and then being too scared to sleep with the lights on later. But there is actually a lot more going on with slasher movies, and Scream isn't keeping any secrets about it. Scream is like a magician doing a trick while also explaining exactly how it's done. Scream is so good at doing the trick, you can know what it's doing and you still get the full exciting experience. The fact there's a bigger cultural discussion about slasher movies, rules, and final girls in horror is thanks to Scream. Aside from the Ghostface killer fascination with bringing up classic slasher cinema like Halloween and Friday the 13th, we've also got a bunch of teenagers talking about horror movie tropes at a party near the end. This alone makes Scream an utterly S-Mike moment in pop culture. It didn't just bring slashers back, and it isn't just a good movie, but it consciously educated people on how movies should be done, creating whole generations of intelligent moviegoers like my lovely horror scholar friend Wes Craven directed Scream, and he's responsible for a lot horror classics. Nightmare on Elm Street, The Last House on the Left, the Williamsons screenplay, and turning it into such a success, IMDb trivia tells me. Slashers were considered dead at this point, so Scream was a risky proposition in the first place, and other directors considered for the project wanted to take it more like comedy. Wes Craven said no way and jumped feet first into making it exactly as scary and splattery and sincere as any other flick. The comedy aspects arise on their own from extremely smart writing. When the movie teens watch Halloween at a party, they're yelling, "Look behind you" at Jamie Lee Curtis as the Ghostface killer approaches from behind them. And then we have another layer because there is a reporter spying on them from outside with her camera guy watching on a delayed monitor, and the camera guy is yelling, "Look behind you," because he sees the Ghostface killer approaching the teens watching Halloween. It's these kinds of moments that function as both meta-commentary and as compelling sources of fear. You know exactly what it's doing, yet you're still excited as hell. The way that a toddler gets really excited about daddy saying, "Ooh, I'm going to get you," and swiping with clawed hands. The rules of the game have been laid out on the table. Now it's just time for us to play somehow. The smart writing and sincere directing isn't the only charm. The casting of Scream is a minor miracle of excellence, apparently. Matthew Lillard was cast sort of accidentally. He was accompanying a girlfriend on an audition when spotted, and his performance of a character with minimal backstory is an absolute riatski, Aki so cute and steamy. I'm betting most girls kind of didn't care if he was a baddie watching Courteney Cox and David Arquette flirt with each other. Knowing they were actually in love at the time electrifies their entire subplot. I could give paragraphs to everyone, Neve Campbell, Drew Barrymore, Rosem Gay, and even Fran Fonzie. There's just so much charisma around every corner. The actors could have made a much worse script successful. Having a good script with this much charming performance is almost too much. Scream is a rarity, a horror movie spoof that succeeds almost as well at provoking scares as laughs. That's because director Wes Craven, A Nightmare on Elm Street, in addition to having a genuine affection for the genre, understands how wildly improbable and easy to lampoon it is. And with Scream, he skewers it at every corner using self-referential humor and a flood of in-jokes, some subtle, some obvious. The list of movies mentioned or sassed is amazingly long and features everything from the 1931 Universal classic Frankenstein to Tom Cruise's All the Right Moves. If you pause the video at the right place, you can see his penis Craven never want to take himself too seriously, pokes fun at his own reputation, and his movies at one point calling himself Wes. Carpenter, an allusion to the numerous people who confuse him with director John Carpenter. References to Carpenter's original Halloween abound. Several minutes of footage from that film are used here in a uniquely effective manner. Scream opens with a 12-minute prologue that introduces us to Casey Drew Barrymore, an all-American girl who's popping popcorn in preparation for watching a video. The phone rings and there's a mysterious voice on the other end. He asks her what her favorite scary movie is, and she replies that it's Halloween. He then invites her to play a game, but she gets freaked out and hangs up when he calls again, and she demands to know what he wants. His response is simple and succinct to see your insides. The cat and mouse game continues until both Casey and her boyfriend, who has the misfortune to stop by, are gutted like fish. This double murder is only the beginning. However, it appears that the killer's real target is Sydney Prescott N.E. Campbell from TV's Party of Five, a high school girl with a troubled past. 1 year ago, Sydney's mother was raped and murdered in a highly publicized case. Now, when Sydney is attacked by someone wearing a Grim Reaper mask and her boyfriend Billy, Skell Rick is arrested. Her life is turned upside down from the bathrooms at school to a friend's house. The stalking continues. Meanwhile, an aggressive tabloid reporter, Courteney Cox, begins harassing Sydney for a story. Scream never stops poking fun at itself. Craven and screenwriter Kevin Williamson allow their characters to make all sorts of disparaging remarks about the horror movie cliches they're living and dying through in describing why she doesn't like slasher. Flick Sydney claims that they're all the same. Some big-breasted blonde who can't act does stupid things. Another character, a video junkie Jamie. There's a formulatoid Havre Simple formula. Then as a group gathers to watch Halloween on TV. This same guy recites the 3 rules of surviving a horror movie: never have sex, never drink, or do drugs, and never say I'll be right back. The most obvious and inventive parody in Scream involves a direct takeoff of the killer stalking Jam Lee Curtis through the house sequence from Halloween while that scene is playing on a TV. Similar events are happening in the very room where the TV sits. In fact, as Michael Myers is approaching Curtis' character from behind, the death mask is sneaking up on the guy watching the video who is screaming at the TV, "Look behind you." Since he's so knowledgeable about the genre, he should consider heeding his own advice. The director doesn't do everything right. The film's self-parody aspects are sometimes too cute, and there are occasions when they dilute attempts at shocks and suspense. There are also a few too many twists and turns in the script, and the ending is unnecessarily protracted. In general, Scream, probably, could have benefited from a little more tightening up during either the scripting or the editing stage. Extra information, both a loving skewering of the tropes of horror and a great slasher in its own right. Wes Craven's 1996 film. Scream is one of the greatest of the genre for good reason. Not only does it still have a real comedic bite, but it boasts stellar performances by everyone from Neve Campbell to Matthew Lillard, as well as one of the most iconic villains to ever grace the silver screen. From the moment we first hear his distorted voice making the phone calls that begin to terrorize the fictional California town of Woodsboro, the film is built to keep you guessing about who could be the murderer behind the mask. Don't worry, in the event you haven't been fortunate enough to see it, for yourself, this review won't dare rob the experience of its reveals, as they are just delightful. While there have been solid entries in the series since that deserve more credit than they have been given, it is hard to ever imagine any being as good as this. Scream doesn't actually begin with Campbell Sydney, who remains the main character in all of Craven's subsequent films, but with someone else entirely. Instead, it is Drew Barrymore's Casey Becker who finds herself home alone and is soon the mysterious killer's first target. When she answers the phone, she unwittingly starts speaking with the murderer, who begins quizzing her about horror movies. And when she fails based on a trick question, will soon bring about her gruesome end. Cheeky yet still terrifying. As we see Casey strung up at the end of this iconic opening scene, sets the tone for what is to come, as will become. increasingly apparent Scream is interested in acknowledging and tossing any genre rules out the window. It starts by killing off the character who was played by one of the film's most recognizable leads and would have typically been the one to make it to the end. It establishes that no one is safe from the knife of the mass killer. Then, and only then, are we actually introduced to Sidney, who would go on to completely own both this film and character in what would prove to be Campbell's breakout role and solidify her as one of the best final girls in horror history. The 1996 film Scream, directed by American horror master Wes Craven, is most known for how it popularized meta-horror, a genre of self-referential horror movies. The movie is also credited with the revival of the horror genre in the late 90s due to its new and refreshing take on a story we've all heard so many times before. Despite the film's self-awareness and irony, it succeeds in creating a truly scary experience with plenty of violence, gore, and heart-pounding scenes. The producers of Scream knew they were doing something new and different when they created the film in order to not drive people away with their experimental concepts. Craven and his team hired famous actress Drew Barrymore to play a large role in Scream, putting her front and center in many advertisements for the movies. The film opens with a quiet house where Casey Becker, played by Barrymore, is making popcorn for a night in. She receives a call from an unknown person who urges her to stay and speak. They continue to converse until things start getting weird. He asks for her name, saying he wants to know who he's looking at. A series of violent events follow that line, eventually ending with the brutal death of Becker. This completely subverted my expectations as a first-time viewer, as I thought Becker would be the final girl, the girl who is the lone survivor in a horror movie. After these first 15 minutes of terror, I was left with questions and was intrigued to meet the true main characters. Scream is set in September of 1996 in the small fictional town of Woodsboro, California. The events of the film transpired over 3 days, making for a quick turn of events. The town was always considered to be a safe place to raise a family until Woodsboro resident and protagonist Sidney Prescott, played by Neve Campbell, lost her mom in a brutal murder. Prescott was a key witness in getting the killer arrested. Despite this, many people in Woodsboro thought that the killer was still roaming free throughout the film. It became increasingly clear that Prescott had put the wrong man in jail and that this new killer was the true culprit. It was very interesting to watch Prescott not only deal with the trauma of having a serial killer in her town, but also her self-doubt growing as she started to question her testimony that could end up killing an innocent man. While at times a serious movie, the dialogue in Dream takes meta to a new level with self-references and humor directed towards the genre of the film. Characters repeatedly mention and make fun of overused horror tropes, directly addressing the issue rather than avoiding it. When asked if she liked horror films, Prescott said, "What's the point? They're all the same. Some stupid killer stalks some big-breasted girl who can't act and who is always running up the stairs when she should be running out the front door. It's insulting." Only seconds later, when being attacked by the killer, Prescott fumbles with the front door lock and quickly decides to run up the stairs. Instead, this scene offers up a perspective many people share about horror movies, that they are predictable and at times stupid, then turning it on its head by offering a logical reason to use. This trope Scream is filled with twists and turns at every corner, making it a great horror movie and a clever story filled with nuances and irony throughout the film. It is clear that the killers have taken inspiration from other famous horror flicks near the end of the movies, suggests that the killer has seen too many scary movies, and here spawns by saying, "Now, shouldn't you blame the movies? Movies don't create psychos. Movies make psychos more creative." When watching Scream, I was reminded of the 2000 film Scary Movie. The LID is more overtly meta and ironic, clearly mocking other famous horror movies, but both do the job of criticizing overused tropes in the horror genre. This film, directed by Wes Craven, written by Kevin Williamson, produced by Kathy Conrad, Kerry Wood, Skick, Drew B., cinematography Mark Irwin, directed by Patrick Lussier, music by Marco Beltrami, Production company Woods Entertainment, distributed by Dimension Films, release dates December 18th, 1996 in Los Angeles, December 20th, 1996 in United States, running time 111 minutes, country uni. Ted States language English, budget 4 to 15 million, box office 173 million. So guys, this is their review of Scream movie and some information about it. How do you like our today's video? Please let us know by commenting, and if you like this video, please like it, share it, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Thanks for watching.